Hey there, everybody. Welcome to a special streaming edition. This is DM Galabond, and tonight we are here for a special first impressions. As you can see from the lovely background that I have up on the stream, this is the cover art for Monsters of the Multiverse, the brand new sourcebook that dropped this week from Wizards of the Coast. Tonight, we're going to take a look at what is in that sourcebook, some of the things that I like about the sourcebook, some of the things that I'm not too thrilled about the sourcebook. So, it's designed to kind of reimagine some of the monsters we've gotten used to in D&D, and it also brings us some new monsters. And then at the end of the show, we will talk about the Monster Monday subject for this coming Monday, which will be taken from the pages of this edition. Now, what you're hearing in the background, mostly, is you're hearing Sirenscape. This is Friendly Tavern and more music with the musicians playing up by the stage. You may also, distantly in the background, be hearing some natural ambient sound because there's a thunderstorm kind of off in the distance, and at least from what I can tell, the microphone on this new headset is sensitive enough that it's actually picking up some of that thunder outside. So, you might hear some of that, you might not. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and let's move away from the stage here, and let's go over by this nice fire. Yeah, this is a nice fire over here in the corner. And we will say welcome everybody to a very special stream. My first impressions of Monsters of the Multiverse. I am DM Galabond, and I am one of those people that has played D&D since the early days of the game. I have played all of the editions since the old Red Box. And now I am in 5th edition. I'm running multiple games. I have a digital collection of all of the source books that have been put out since 2014 when they launched 5th edition, and I have been tracking the growth of 5th edition along the way. And in the last couple of years, every time they've released a new source book, I've done one of these first impressions streams. If you have any questions, we are live on Twitch. You can throw questions in the Twitch chat, and I will see that on my monitor over here, and then we can discuss those. But what we're going to start off with is we're going to start off with looking at a little bit about the book, and then we will spotlight a few of the different creatures that they have in the book. One section of the book is aimed at players, one section of the book is aimed at DMs, and you can get a lot of ideas whether you're a player, a DM, or you're just a fan of great fantasy artwork by looking at this game or by looking at this book. All right, so let's go over and switch over to the slides here, and we'll make sure that comes up. All right, yes, it does. All right, so we will go ahead and talk a little bit about Monsters of the Multiverse. It's a new source book that provides options for players and DMs. Furthermore, it reimagines some of the creatures and races to the extent that Wizards of the Coast has declared 2 earlier 5e source books are officially discontinued. Those 2 sources are Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes and Volo's Guide to Monsters. So, what do you mean, you ask? do you mean, you ask, that they've reprinted all of those monsters? Well, in fact, yes, they have. They've reprinted all of those monsters. Some of them have changed subtly, some of them have changed more drastically. Some of the changes I like, and some of the changes I'm not so crazy about. They've also presented new options for playable races. And those playable races come out of source books that range back as far as Princes of the Apocalypse in 2015 when that was released. All right, in some cases, monsters get new artwork. In other cases, they get a new treatment on some of their mechanical features. I'm not sure I like all of the new changes, but I firmly believe Wizards of the Coast has made these changes based on player and DM feedback. So it might be a good change for them as a company. However, I want to remind you, as a DM, always remember that Wizards of the Coast does not have the final word on how you run monsters or races at your table. I don't have the final word about your table. Your players don't even have the final word about your table. It's your table. That means it follows your rules, Mr. DM, Ms. DM. If you like the old way monsters work, then by all means keep using that. If you like the new way, then by all means switch to the new way. And don't let anyone tell you that you're wrong for making either decision. Just because I don't like something doesn't mean that you have to dislike it. You may like it and you may have some great reasons for liking it. I'm going to give you some of the reasons I don't like it, but you may agree with those, you may not agree. So, uh, once again, D&D is all about the expression of creativity, and D&D works best when everybody at the table agrees, but somebody has to be the final arbiter. And the way D&D is set up, that's always the DM. Okay, see, even the Thunder agrees with me. All right. Tonight we'll discuss the contents of the book, look at some new creatures that are introduced here, and talk about some changes to the lore, the artwork, and mechanics of the monsters that are reimagined from previous 5e sources in Monsters of the Multiverse. All right, so first let's talk about the contents of the book. It's got two main chapters. The first chapter is Fantastical Races, and this chapter provides new traits and lore about more than 30 playable races that have been introduced since the publication of the Player's Handbook in 2014. It updates or revises information about races that have been introduced in supplements ranging from Princes of the Apocalypse in 2015 all the way to Wild Beyond the Witchlight last year, 2021. So they have tinkered and toyed with all of these races. So just interesting to look at those. Chapter 2 of the book is the Bestiary. And this chapter provides details about 250 different monsters. Now, a few of these monsters are new, but like the Fantastical Races, many of these monsters are reimagined versions of monsters released in previous D&D 5e source books, drawing heavily on those released in the previous Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes and Volo's Guide to Monsters book. And then there's a couple of different indexes. So, indexes of the new monsters that are arranged by creature type and by challenge rating. So that it kind of gives you a little bit of a better way of looking at things. Now, in the early days of 5e, I collected the hardback versions of all the source books. I mean, I love nice, the smell of a new book. I love the way the spines of the 5e source books look, the nice glossy black spines with the writing, and then they have like the uniform little symbols that indicate each of the different campaigns or each of the different source books and everything. It's very pretty, very nice. However, as a DM who primarily runs games that are online on Roll20, I find it's almost a necessity for me to have a digital collection of the source books. So I have all of the source books for 5e on digital, and pretty much after, I want to say after about Ghosts of Saltmarsh, that may have been the last of the books that I went out and bought in hardcover. All the rest of them that have been released, I just have digitally, because it's easy to um, arrange them and index them and find things on D&D Beyond. That's one of the things I like about that system. So uh, it's nice that they have the indexes within the source book of Monsters in the Multiverse, but for me, it's kind of I just use the index that's part of D&D Beyond. All right. So, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the changes that have happened to one of the playable races. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these because we'd be here all night. And also, it's a little bit spoilers talking about this stuff, so I don't want to make wizards think that they can just watch this video and people will learn about all of the monsters in the book. No. But we'll go through one of the races as an example. And the race we're going to take a look at, the playable race we're going to take a look at, is the Fire Genasi. So we're going to examine stat blocks, descriptions, and lore. We're going to look at how they were presented in Princes of the Apocalypse, where the Genasi were first introduced as a playable race, and how they are introduced in Monsters of the Multiverse. All right, so now this is kind of small, but when we'll actually look at the source book so you can see it a little bit more clearly. If we go back to Princes of the Apocalypse from 2015, there were some Genasi traits that all Genasi had, and then each of the sub-races, the fire, air, water, and earth Genasi, had some individual traits. So all Genasi had the ability score increase, and all Genasi had a constitution increase of 2, and for fire Genasi, there was an intelligence increase of 1. Genasi mature about the same as humans and reach adulthood in their late teens. They live somewhat longer than humans do, up to 120 years. That's the same for all Genasi. Alignment, independent and self-reliant. Genasi tend toward a neutral alignment. That's the same for all Genasi. Size, Genasi are as varied as their mortal parents, but generally built like humans, standing anywhere from 5 to over 6 feet tall. Size is medium. That's for all Genasi. Speed, walking speed is 30 feet. Languages, you can speak, read, and write Common and Primordial. And Primordial is a guttural language filled with harsh syllables and hard consonants. And then the Fire Genasi only traits include dark vision. So you can see in dim light within 60 feet as if you were in bright light, and in darkness as if it's dim light. Your ties to the elemental plane of fire make your dark vision unusual. Everything you see in darkness is a shade of red. Then fire resistance, you have resistance to fire damage, and reach to the blaze. You know the produce flame cantrip. Once you reach 3rd level, you can cast Burning Hand spell with this trait as a 1st level spell, and you regain the ability to cast it this way when you finish a long rest. Constitution is the spellcasting ability for these spells. All right, so that was how Genasi were first introduced, and specifically Fire and Genasi were first introduced back in Princes of the Apocalypse. Well, now we come to Fire Genasi in Monsters of the Multiverse, and there's been a few changes. They're kind of subtle, but they're significant. Ability score increase. When determining your character's ability scores, increase one score by 2, increase a different score by 1, or increase 3 different scores by 1. The quick build section for your character's class offers suggestions on which scores to increase. So you can follow those suggestions or ignore them, but you can't raise any of your scores above 20. Now, in Monsters of the Multiverse, that's not a Genasi specific uh, ability score. That's for all of the races. And what does this do? It gives you a little bit more flexibility. Now, when they launched 5e and they started putting out some of these races, and you looked at things and they said specific races get specific increases to specific abilities, it meant that certain races were better optimized for certain classes. So, in other words, a race that gets um, a race that gets an intelligence bonus is better suited for an intelligence caster, let's say. A race that gets a dex bonus is better suited for a rogue character, and so on and so forth. So, languages. Your character can speak, read, and write Common and one other language that you and your DM agree is appropriate for the character. Player's Handbook offers a list of languages to choose from. DM is free to modify that list for a campaign. So once again, just because you're a Genasi doesn't mean you are locked into Primordial. And once again, that language trait is for all of the races that are in Monsters of the Multiverse, not just the Genasi. Creature type, you are a humanoid. Okay, so the Genasi are humanoid. Size, you are medium or small. So you choose the size when you select this race. So now, when you select Genasi as a race, you can decide if you're a medium size or a small size. So you can have a gnome size Genasi, a halfling size Genasi, or a furbolg size Genasi. You can, or a human size Genasi. You can be anywhere in that range. You don't have to be limited to just medium and just about the size of a human. So walking speed is 30 feet. That is regardless of the size you choose. Dark vision. You can see in dim light within 60 feet if it were bright light, darkness if it were dim light. Now, a difference with the Genasi, the fire Genasi in Monsters of the Multiverse, their dark vision is just like all other dark vision, shades of gray. It doesn't have that red shift that the Fire Genasi had from Princes of the Apocalypse. Fire resistance, you have resistance to fire damage. Same thing. All right. Now, Reach to the Blaze. That ability is still here, but again, it's subtly changed. So you know the Produce Flame cantrip. Starting at 3rd level, you can cast Burning Hand spell with this trait. Starting at 5th level, you can also cast the Flame Blade spell with this trait without requiring a material component. So once you cast Burning Hands or Flame Blade with this trait, you can't cast that spell with it again until you finish a long rest. You can also cast either of those spells using any spell slots you have of the appropriate level. So you get a little bit more opened up with that reach for the blade or reach for the blaze. So you have a few more options there. And then intelligence, wisdom, or charisma is the spellcasting ability for these spells when you cast them with this trait. So choose that when you select this race. So again, the theme here with all of these changes that they've made, not only to the Fire Genasi, but to all of the playable races, is to open it up and make it a little bit more flexible, both for players and for DMs. So, gosh, I really want to play a Fire Genasi, but I kind of had my heart set on playing a cleric instead of a wizard. Do I have to have that boost to my to my intelligence? No, you don't now. You can arrange those pluses any way you want. So you could put 2 points into intelligence and 1 point into something else. You don't have to put it even into constitution. You could put 2 points into wisdom and 1 point into strength if you want, or into constitution or dexterity or whatever. Or if you had some really high rolls, you could bump up 3 individual stats by 1. You can spread that out and make that available. So it just opens up and makes a little bit more flexible the various options that you have. All right, so now what we're going to do is we are going to go and we are going to look at the actual um, pages in the source book. Okay, yep, there we go. All right, I'm going to run through the table of contents for you, and then we're going to look at the fire genasi, so you can see how this is laid out here. All right, so fantastical races. You see that you have everything from Aarakocra, Aasimar, Bugbear, all the way down to Tortle, Triton, and Yuan-Ti. And of course, all of these races were introduced in various source books. A lot of them came in with Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, and then some of them were introduced along with different expansions. Now, when I was looking at this and setting up, doing my research for this, I could have sworn that the Aarakocra were introduced as a playable race back in Princes of the Apocalypse, but it turns out it wasn't in that source. It wasn't in the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide. It was actually introduced as a playable race in Explorer's Guide to Wildemount, which is the Critical Role source. So I thought that was very interesting that they took a an NPC creature that we knew about as far back as Princes of the Apocalypse, at least in 5e. And of course, Aarakocra have been around for many editions back throughout the history of D&D. But they first came in as a 5e NPC race, and you interacted with them in Princes of the Apocalypse, but they didn't get introduced as a playable race until you got to all the way to the Wild Amount. Now, I think what I'm remembering is I think that when you were playing or running Adventures League, as I was back in the early days of 5e, that in the side adventures or the Adventurers League specific events and adventures, they had rules that Wizards of the Coast published for the Adventurers League for creating an Aarakocra uh, playable race. And a lot of people were kind of upset because when they introduced them there, they said that you couldn't use flight at first level. Basically, you had to get to a point where you could use. I think you had to get to like third level or something, which is basically about the time they figured that other characters could start maybe afford to buying Boots of Flying. That that's kind of where you had to be before you could actually start using flying. Yeah, it's just kind of a weird thing. So they've done that, but I believe that all of the other races here, all the playable races, have already been introduced. I do not think that there are any new playable races in this book. So they are all reimaginings of other races that already exist. And they all have subtle, or many of them have subtle changes in the way that the Fire Genasi do. Then we have our bestiary, and um, you they give us a lot of the monsters that are families of monsters, basically, that came out of either Volos or out of Mordenkainen's. And in some cases, they give us updated versions of them, and in some cases, they do give us some brand new monsters. And we're going to come back and we're going to look at this when we talk about selecting our topic for Monster Monday, because we're actually going to look at a new family of monsters that's in this source book on Monday night. All right, so we have all these different monsters that are coming out of here. The Abishai, um, there's the there's various different clockworks that come out of here. There's some variants of some giants and things like that. We have dinosaurs in here. We have some of the elemental princes are in here. Jublex and Zugtmoy are in here. So let's see. That probably means that we also have. Yep, we have Demogorgon. We have Inagu. We have several of the others in here. We also have some of the greater devils, like Garyon is here. We've done a Monster Monday about Garyon. And then you have different ogres, the ogres of war and whatnot. We have some different Shadar-kai monsters in here, some hobgoblins in here, a bunch of different kobold things in here. We have sword wraiths in here, star spawn. We have the Steeders, which came out of Princes of the Apocalypse, if I recall correctly. Turtles, a number of trolls, vampiric mist, Vegapygmies, which came out of Tomb of Annihilation. We have various different NPC or monster warlocks, war priest, and then a bunch of different wizards, Woodwode. And then we have Zartan, Zariel, and Zugtmoy. So we have a bunch of different monsters that are out of this particular adventure. The Oblex, those guys have been around before. And then I'm going to take a look just to show you the index, the monster list. So stat blocks by creature type, which of course in D&D Beyond that is all tied into the D&D Beyond index. So most of the different stat blocks are represented here. And then stat blocks by challenge rating. So challenge rating all the way from CR0 with cranium rats, and the toughest monster that they give us is CR26, which is 3 different creatures: Demogorgon, Orcus, and Zariel. Then stat blocks by environment. So Arctic, coastal, desert, forest, grasslands, hills, mountains, swamps, underdark, underwater, and urban. So those are the various different indexes they give us for the monsters. All right, so that's kind of cool. We're going to go back to the table of contents here. Then we're going to switch back over to the slides. All right. And we're now going to take a look at a monster and the way that the monster has changed. And and every monster they present here, at least from what I've spot checked, every monster that's in here is slightly tweaked and slightly updated. And if you're doing a fast scan over the monster stat block, you'll miss it because things look very similar, but there are some subtle differences, and we're going to point those out. So, we first learned about the Armanite, which is a type of demon, I believe. I will be corrected when we get to the stat block, whether it's a devil or a demon. It's a fiend in any case, and that came to us in Mordenkainen's Tome Foes, and now it is reimagined in Monsters of the Multiverse. And what we're going to do first is we're going to go and look at the different sources, and we will see what the lore is on those creatures. All right. Oh, I forgot to do something. We're going to run back and we're going to talk about the Genasi. Rewind to the Fire Genasi as they appeared in Princes of the Apocalypse, where they first were a playable race. So it says, those who think of other planes at all consider them remote, distant realms. Planar influence can be felt throughout the world, and sometimes manifest in beings who, through an accident of birth, carry the power of the planes in their blood. The Genasi are one such people, the offspring of genies and mortals. Elemental planes are often inhospitable to natives of the material plane, crushing earth, searing flames, boundless skies, endless seas, making visiting these places dangerous for even a short time. The genies do not face such trouble when venturing into the mortal world. They adapt well mingled elements of the material plane and sometimes visit, whether they come of their own volition or they are compelled by magic. And some genies can adopt mortal guise and travel incognito. And then, there's obviously a romance. Um, boy human meets a girl genie. Boy genie meets a girl human. Things happen, and then a little Genasi is the result of that. Genasi result from exposure to a surge of elemental power through phenomena such as eruption from the inner planes or planar convergence. So you can either be born as a Genasi or you can become a Genasi. And that, of course, is great fun for a very creative player to work into their backstory if they want that to be there. So Genasi inherit something from both sides of their dual nature. They resemble humans, but have unusual skin color. And there's something odd about them. Elemental blood flowing through their veins manifests differently in each Genasi, often as magical power. And Genasi can usually pass for human if they're only seen in silhouette. Those of earth or water descent tend to be heavier. Those of air or fire tend to be lighter. A given Genasi might have some features reminiscent of the mortal parent. Pointed ears from an elf, stockier frame, thick hair from a dwarf, small hands and feet from a halfling, etc., etc., etc. Okay. Some Genasi live as outcasts, driven in exile. Now, Genasi rarely lack for confidence in themselves, is equal to almost any challenge in their path. Certainly might manifest graceful self-assurance, but in one Genasi and in arrogance in another. Such self-confidence can sometimes be blind Genasi to risk, and their great plans often get them and others into trouble. So, it talks a little bit about Genasi lands, Genasi names, Genasi traits, yada yada yada. And then we've gone into the mechanical features of Fire Genasi. Well, now let's see, what do they say about Genasi in Monsters of the Multiverse? They say, tracing their ancestors to Genie's Velin Plains, each Genasi can tap into the power of one of the elements air, earth, fire, and water. These are the four pillars of the material plane and four types of Genasi. Some Genasi are direct descendants of a genie, while others were born to non Genasi parents who lived near a place suffused by a genie's magic. Typical Genasi has a lifespan of 120 years. And then they go into the various things. So, Fire Genasi traits descended from a Freet. The genies fell into a plane of fire. Fire Genasis channel the flamboyant and often destructive nature of flame. They show their heritage in their skin tones, which can range from deep charcoal to shades of red and orange. Some bear skin tones common to humanity, but with fiery marks such as slowly swirling lights under their skin that resemble embers or glowing red lines tracing over their bodies like cracks. Fire Genasi hair can resemble threads of fire or sooty smoke. And in terms of lore, that's all they give us in the new book. So while they gave you a lot more freedom in how you create the Genasi, they took away a lot of the lore about Genasi that was introduced in Princes of the Apocalypse. So I like the flexibility that they've added. I dislike the fact that they've taken away the lore. Now, they may presume that anybody who's a completionist like me already has Princes of the Apocalypse, and if they want to refer back to those, more details about the Genasi in general and the mixture of the races, elemental, genie, and mortals from the natural world, well, okay. But if somebody doesn't have that, or if a player comes in new, now that the now that those older source books, well, I guess Princes of the Apocalypse is still available, but with Volos and Mordenkainen's being basically not published any longer, and you can't purchase them directly from Wizards of the Coast anymore, then you're missing a little bit. So, I don't know. I would have preferred that they bring those racial descriptions in and put it in this book so that it prevents somebody from having to go back and buy those older source books to find the information, the more detailed information about lore for the races. But then again, that's me speaking from a consumer standpoint, not me speaking from Wizards of the Coast, which, hey, they want to sell more books. So I get this book to give you the mechanical stats, and if you want to know the lore, hey, you can go out and you can buy our Princess of the Apocalypse adventure, and that has all the lore about Genasi in it. Yeah, this, that, and the other. All right, so let's go ahead and let's go back to the. Oh, no. We were getting ready to go straight into talking about the Armanite, weren't we? Okay, so this is the Armanite as it appeared in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. Alright. Great herds of Armanites race across the blasted fields of the abyss, bent on slaughter and death, driven by unrestrained bloodlust. Whether being controlled by more powerful demons or charging into battle for the sake of it, Armanites use their claws, hooves, and long whip-like tails to tear apart their foes. They live for war, and yes, they are demons. In the armies of the demon lords, Armanites perform the role of heavy cavalry, leading the charge and tearing into their enemies' flanks. Armanites fight all the time, even among themselves if they can't find another enemy. They make ideal shock troops, courageous to the point of stupidity and utterly savage. They're a walking arsenal. Part of what makes the Armanites so fearsome is the number of weapons they have at their disposal. They possess sharp hooves, claws that end in curling talons, and long serrated tails that can flinch the flesh from a victim, and they use them all to carve through their foes. They're up against tough formations. They can call upon their innate magic to loose bolts of lightning and blow holes in the enemy ranks. All right, so the Armanite is a large demon, chaotic evil, armor class 16, hit points 84, speed of 60 feet. Stat block significantly above average in across the board, except for intelligence, which is kind of dumb. That's their dumb stat. They resist cold, fire, and lightning, immune to poison, and immune to being poisoned. They have dark vision out to 120 feet, passive perception of 11. They speak abyssal, and they have telepathy out to 120 feet, CR7 monster. Now, magic resistance. Armanite has advantage on saving throws against spells and other magical effects. Magic weapons. So when they were first introduced, magic weapons. The Armanite's weapon attacks are magical, and the hooves, the claws, and the tail are all considered melee weapon attacks. So then, multi-attack. The Armanite makes 3 attacks, one with its hooves, one with its claws, and one with its serrated tail. So the hooves have a +8 to hit, reach 5 feet, 1 target, and deal 2d6 plus 5 bludgeoning damage. The claws, +8, reach 5 feet, and 2d4 plus 5 slashing damage. And then the tail, +8, reach 10 feet, and deal 2d10 plus 5 slashing damage. And then they have that lightning lance, which recharges on a 5 or 6. Loose a bolt of lightning in a line 60 feet long and 10 feet wide. Every creature must make a DC 15 dex save or take 68 lightning damage on a failed save, half as much damage on a successful one. Well, now let's take a look at the monster in Monsters of the Multiverse. All right, we have a description, which is pretty much the same description that has that is carried over from Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. And the Armanite is still a large fiend, typically chaotic evil. Now, that's another thing. There's a subtle way in which they have changed the alignment. It used to be kind of that just there was a standard alignment for a monster, but now there's a typical alignment for a monster, which is Wizards of the Coast way of telling DMs that didn't realize they could do it. You know what? If you want an Armanite that's not chaotic evil, you can have an Armanite that's not chaotic evil. I mean, you'd have to figure out why, but you might have an Armanite that's a shopkeeper in a city. you know, maybe it's actually a neutral good Armanite. Why would there be a demon that's neutral good? I don't know, but it might make sense in your campaign. So, hit points 94, speed of 60 feet, pretty much the same stat block. Intelligence is still their dump stat. Resistant to cold, fire, and lightning. They are immune to poison or being poisoned. Dark vision out to 20 feet, passive perception 11. Languages the same. Abyssal and telepathy out to 120 feet. They also still retain magic resistance. So advantage on saving throws against spells and other magical effects. Now, they still get the 3 attacks. 1 claw, 1 hoof, and 1 serrated tail. The claws this time. +8, 5 feet. 2d4 plus 5 slashing damage. And 2d8 lightning damage. Well, there's already been a couple of subtle changes. I haven't mentioned them, but that's new. It used to be that the claws only did slashing damage. Well, now they do slashing damage and lightning damage. Well, what about the other attacks? Okay, well, let's look at the hooves. The hooves are +8 hit, 5 feet reach, 2d6 plus 5 bludgeoning damage. and if the target is large or smaller, it must succeed in a DC 16 strength saving throw or be knocked prone. Well, now that's new. Originally, the hooves only did bludgeoning damage. Now, they do bludgeoning damage and they can knock you prone. Lightning Lance, 5 or 6, same recharge. Bolt of lightning, 60 feet long, 10 feet wide. Every creature in the line must make a DC 15 dex save or take 8d8 lightning damage on a failed save, half as much on a successful one. Okay. Well, it just so happens that I put a slide together to detail what the differences are, because it's not always apparent at first blush. So let's take a look at, these are just the stat blocks from the 2 source books. Well, now, let's see what the changes are. In Monsters of the Multiverse, the Armanite got a little beefier, went up 10 hit points from 84 to 94. In Tome of Foes, it didn't give us proficiency bonus for the monsters. Monsters of the Multiverse includes a proficiency bonus for every single monster. So if you want to know how they arrived at the special saving throw numbers that some of the monsters have in their stat block, it's because it uses their ability score and their proficiency bonus. Okay. Interestingly, the original Armanite, it specified in the stat block that their weapon attacks are magical. In Monsters of the Multiverse, weapon attacks are not specified as magical. Okay. So that means the weapon attacks, if you just go with the stat block as written, in the original Tome of Foes, the original Armanite, they would or if somebody has, if somebody is wearing armor that gives them resistance to bludgeoning, slashing, and piercing from non-magical weapons, well, the hoof, claw, and tail attacks would overcome that because they are magical. The new one, well, that specific bludgeoning and slashing from those attacks would not overcome it. However, you get new damage types. So in the original version, the hoof attacks deal 2d6 plus 5 bludgeoning damage, period. In the Monsters of the Multiverse, the hoof attacks deal the same bludgeoning damage and requires a strength saving throw, or you're knocked prone. Now, in the original version, the claw attacks deal 2d4 plus 5 slashing damage only. But in the new version, the claw attacks deal 2d4 plus 5, and it adds 2d8 lightning damage. So you see what they're doing. They're twisting the stat block a little bit, and this is how they justify keeping it at the same challenge rating. Because if they made it a tougher monster, if they left it with the magical weapon attacks, and they added the extra damage, well, it might tip the balance to move it from a CR7 to a CR8. Now, those slight changes may not be enough to move it to a CR8, but I think that the reason they made these changes is in their minds, they probably have some kind of formula that they use to figure out what the challenge rating for a monster would be. And they probably figured that you add these things, you remove that thing, you can keep it at the same challenge rating. If you add too much or take away too much, it's going to either push the challenge rating up or pull the challenge rating down, one of the two. And then last but not least, the original version of the Armanite, the Lightning Lance deals 68 lightning damage. The new version of the Armanite, the lightning lance deals 8d8 lightning damage. So it's 2d8 more lightning damage from the lightning lance. So that's an interesting thing. Now, what do you guys think of those changes? On the whole, I kind of like it. I like this monster having some, you know, having some extra things it can do with those attacks. I like having, switching up the damage types a little bit. Where the claws deal both slashing and lightning damage. Kind of makes it feel a little bit more scary when you have that going on. And I think, removing that magical weapon attack tag is perfectly fine. All right. Now we're going to take a look at another example. And the reason I chose this example is because there's a change they've made. And I've talked about it a couple of times in Monster Monday already, because now we're looking at the monsters that come out of Strixhaven. And this is a change that they actually started, at least in Strixhaven, maybe before. I would have to go back through some of the other source books that came out last year and see exactly when this first came into being, because I don't have an encyclopedic memory of every monster that appeared in every source book. I have a day job. I have too much other stuff to do. I got to run my campaigns. I don't have time to, read all these cover to cover every day. All right. So the this is the Drow Matron Mother. Now, I will be very frank and very upfront. I don't like the decision of how they changed this monster, but I understand why they did it. Now, all the spellcasting monsters have been streamlined, and from a practical standpoint, it makes sense. For your players, the only time your players are ever going to interact with this monster is probably in one combat, or they're only going to interact with it one combat at a time. And in D&D 5e, combats rarely last more than about 5 rounds. Now, if you have big multi-wave combats, they can last a long time. But if the party is going up against a kind of a boss monster and a few trash mobs, then it's probably going to be 5-6 rounds. So if you have a high level spellcaster, what they did at the beginning of D&D, and we're gonna D&D 5e, is they would give you kind of a readout of all of the spell levels, all the spell slots, and then they would fill all that information in for you, and they tell you what the full load of spells for that monster would be. They have streamlined that down, and the justification that they gave at the D&D, I can never remember where they called it, D&D Days or D&D Live or whatever, last fall, where they were sort of talking about the pathway forward for D&D. They said they were streamlining it because they wanted to give DMs just sort of the essential spells that in their minds the designers thought these monsters would use. But to me, it feels like they've dumbed it down. And I understand why they did that. But I would like to offer an alternative to the way they did it before, the way they're doing it now. So we're going to talk about this, and we're going to use the Drow Matron Mother as our example. All right, so let us go back to the web pages over here. And we will look at the Drow Matron Mother. Now, Drow Matron Mother also appeared in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes originally. Head of each Drow noble house, it's a Matron Mother, influential priestess of Lolth, charged with carrying out the goddess's will while also advancing the interests of the family. Matron Mothers embody the scheming and treachery associated with Queen of Spiders. Each stands at the center of a vast conspiratorial web, with demons, drow, spiders, and slaves positioned between them and their enemies. Although Matron Mothers command great powers, that power depends on maintaining the Spider Queen's favor, and the Dark Goddess sometimes capriciously takes back what she is given. Stat block here represents a Matron Mother at the height of her power. So, the Drow Matron Mother. When she was first presented, she had an AC of 17, 262 hit points, 30 feet, above average stat block in everything. 12 is her dump stat, but even 12 is above average. Saving throw proficiencies with con, wisdom, and charisma, skills, condition immunities, senses, dark vision, passive perception 21, elvish and undercommon, CR of 20. So she's a pretty beefy monster. She has 35 hit dice. So, all right, Fey Ancestry has advantage on saving throws against being charmed, and magic can't put her to sleep. So, innate spellcasting. Now, notice there's 2 blocks of spellcasting here. There's the innate spellcasting, which basically is the drow magic, and it's expanded a little bit because she's a very powerful drow. So you have the dancing light to detect magic, and once per day she can do clairvoyance, darkness, detect thoughts, dispel magic, fairy fire, levitate, self only, and suggestion. Then there's lost fickle favors. Bonus action, she can bestow the Spider Queen's blessing, which makes the ally take 2d6 psychic damage, but then gives the ally advantage on the next attack roll that it makes until the end of its next turn. So, yes, this is advantage, but it's going to cost you. I'm going to destroy your mind. Okay. Magic resistance has advantage on saving throws against spells. Now, the second spell casting block tells you that she's a 20th level spellcaster. Tells you wisdom is her spellcasting ability is wisdom. Gives you DC and bonus for spellcasting, and says has the following cleric spells memorized. And notice it gives you the full load from cantrips all the way down to level 9. All of the spells that she has. They're all pre-arranged. Now, what that means if you're in combat, if you haven't looked at a monster, and alright, guys, fellow DMs, if you're using a CR20 monster and you haven't really looked at what its abilities are before the combat starts, that's on you. You should make some notes, well, when this combat starts, what's the opener going to be? What is the person going to do? Now, as you get into combat, you do have to keep in mind, okay, they have this concentration spell going, so that means all these others are now out, and sometimes you have to, oh crap, I can't do that because that's concentration, I want to keep that one going. But at least initially you should kind of have an idea what you want to do. I guess a lot of DMs, they, especially when they're running campaigns that are pre-published, they get to the fight and they go, oh crap, what am I going to do? There's all these choices here. And then, of course, you would have to you'd have to figure that out. All right, sunlight sensitivity, disadvantage on attack rolls and perception checks that rely on sight when in sunlight. So, multi-attack makes 2 demon staff attacks or 3 tentacle rod attacks. Demon staff is plus 10, 1d6 plus 4, or 1d8 plus 4 bludgeoning, and depending on whether you use it with one hand or 2 hands. plus 4d6 psychic damage. And in addition, the victim must make a 19 wisdom save or become frightened for 1 minute. And repeat the saving throw at the end of each turn. Tentacle Rod, plus 9 to hit, reach of 15 feet. 1d6 bludgeoning damage, and if it's hit 3 times by the rod on one turn, must succeed in DC 15 con save or suffer the following effects for 1 minute. Speed is halved, disadvantage on dex saves, and can't use reactions. And moreover, on each of its turns, it can make either an action or a bonus action, but not both. At the end of each turn, it can repeat the saving throw, ending the effect. And Summon Servant. It gets to summon a Retriever, which is a construct, or a Yolklo, which is a demon. The summoned creature appears in an unoccupied space within 50 feet, acts as an ally, and can summon other demons. So legendary actions can take 3 legendary actions. Make an extra attack with a demon staff. Compel a demon, which costs 2 actions. Allied demon must make 1 attack against the target of the Drow's choice that she can see, or cast a spell, which costs 1 to 3 actions. Spends a spell slot to cast a first, second, or third level spell that she has prepared. So doing so costs 1 legendary action per level of the spell. So that is the Drow Matron Mother in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. Now let's look at the Drow Matron Mother in the Monsters from the Multiverse. Alright, so we get lore. Among Drow followers of Loth, each noble house is led by a matron mother. Influential priests of Loth charge of carrying out the god's will while also advancing the interests of the family. They embody scheming and treachery associated with the Queen of Spiders. Each stands in the center of a vast conspiratorial web. Demon spiders and conscripted soldiers positioned between them and their enemies. Although matron mothers command great power, that power depends on maintaining the Spider Queen's favor, and the goddess sometimes capriciously takes back what she's given. And stat block represents a matron mother at the height of her power. So matron mothers almost never encountered alone, typically accompanied by a Drow favored consort and a Drow house captain, each of whom appears in this book. Other Underdark creatures might also be in the priestess's presence, providing protection or advice. Now, I would say that if your party ever encountered a matron mother with only a Drow favored consort and only a Drow house captain, that probably means that you've been fighting for a while and you have managed to corner them after destroying a bunch of their other followers. Because in my mind, Drow matron mother is going to have a lot more than that. And of course, the other way is if you manage to sneak your way through and not get detected by the magical sensors the Drow have all over the place and whatnot. So now we get a new option here. Remember, we saw with the playable races, and it's generally something that I've noticed. They are, in some ways, encouraging a bit more freedom for the way you use monsters. So now you have Mothers of Rebellion. Some matron mothers renounce Loth and join the war against their former goddess. Such Drow could be of any alignment. They lose the following abilities of the stat block. They lose Lost Fickle Favor, the Summon Servant, and Compel Demon. But even without those abilities, Drow mothers are formidable opponents. Several of them hold positions of great influence in the Underdark armies arrayed against the followers of Loth. So now let's take a look. Well, armor class 17, 247 hit points, 30 feet, and pretty much the same stat block. Saving throws, skills, condition immunities, perceptions, languages, Elvish Undercommon, CR 20, but hey, now we get that reference to the proficiency bonus. Fey Ancestry. Drow has advantage on saving throws against being charmed, and magic can't put the Drow to sleep. Special equipment. Well, that's new. Drow wields a tentacle rod. It's not new that they have a tentacle rod, but in a lot of these stat blocks, especially for particular high level NPC monsters, they are going to give you an item on special equipment that they have. Sunlight sensitivity. Now, multi attack, that's a little bit different. 2 demon staff attacks, or 1 demon staff attack and 3 tentacle rod attacks. So instead of getting to make 2 attacks or 3 attacks, it's to make 2 attacks or 4 attacks. And the demon staff, pretty much the same attack bonus and damage. Tentacle rod, same attack bonus and damage, same effects for those. But now here's a new thing. Divine Flame, twice per day. 10-foot radius, 40-foot high column of divine fire sprouts up in an area up to 120 feet away from the drow. Each creature in the column must make a DC 20 dex save or take 4d6 fire damage and 4d6 radiant damage on a failed save, or half as much damage on a successful one. Basically, it's the Drow Matron Mother's version of Flame Strike. Okay, one other thing I need to mention at the top. Drow Matron Mother, medium humanoid, cleric, elf. So has the cleric tag in her monster type. Typically neutral evil. Alright, spellcasting. Drow casts one of the following spells, requiring no material components and using charisma as a spellcasting ability. Spell save DC of 20. Now notice, at will, command, dancing lights, detect thaumaturgy. Twice per day, banishment, blade barrier, cure wounds, hold person, plane shift, or silence. And then once per day, clairvoyance, darkness, detect thoughts, dispel magic, fairy fire, gate, levitate, self-only, suggestion. No listing of how many spell slots 1 through 9. Not a full load of spells. A very streamlined, very limited amount of spells. What's more, a very limited number of times per day they can cast those spells. Now, like I said, most of the time, your party is only going to encounter this monster in a combat. So they're not going to have that many rounds to cast spells. So from that standpoint, streamlining that gives less paralysis by analysis to the DM, if you want to put it that way. Fewer options, quicker to determine what they're going to do, if they're going to cast a spell, and move on, keep the combat going. All right. Then still have the Lost Fickle Favor, still the same thing with 2d6 psychic damage. Summon Servant. Well, summons a Glabrazu or a Yaklal. Now, both of those are demons. And the original version, they could summon a construct or a demon. This one is one type of a demon or another. And then legendary actions. Compel demon, make an extra demon staff attack, or cast a spell. And notice, that just costs 2 actions, period. No, it's not a choice whether it costs 1, 2, or 3 legendary actions. It always costs 2 actions, whether she wants to do a cantrip or whether she wants to do one of those once per day spells. So that's a change in the way they have done the Drow Matron Mother. Now we're going to go back to the slides here, and we're going to take a look at the changes line by line. So in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, in the monster type, no class was specified. Monsters of Multiverse, we get the class of Cleric. Original version, she had 262 hit points. Well, now she's been graded down a little bit easier to kill, 247 hit points instead of 262. Original version, no proficiency bonus specified, proficiency bonus +6. Original version, no equipment tag. In this version, special equipment tag for Tentacle Rod. And then Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, innate spellcasting. Monsters of the Multiverse, no innate spellcasting. Original version, magic resistance. Monsters of the Multiverse, very importantly, no magic resistance. So she loses that. She loses hit points and she loses magic resistance. So they're taking quite a bit away from this. Spellcasting, full load and full spell slots for spell levels 1 through 9. Spellcasting in Monsters of the Multiverse, limited at will, once per day and twice per day spells. So in the original version, multi-attack, 2 demon staff or 3 tentacle rod attacks. Monsters of the Multiverse, 2 demon staff or 1 demon staff and 3 tentacle rod attacks. And then the original version did not have that divine flame action, and in Monsters of the Multiverse gets divine flame twice per day. And then Tome of Foes, Summon Servant, you get to do a Retriever, which is a CR 14 construct, or a Yocklaw. And Summon Servant in Monsters of the Multiverse, you get to do a Glabrazu, which is a CR 9 demon, or a Yocklaw. So her summoned monsters are actually weaker in the new version. So they've nerfed her spellcasting. They've nerfed her hit points. They've nerfed her resistances. They've given her the Divine Flame. And they've nerfed her Summon Servant. So it feels like, kind of generally as a rule, that for spellcasters, it feels like they've kind of nerfed those. And that's just my standpoint as somebody who is always behind the DM screen and looks at these monsters as things I might want to use to throw at my party. But it got me thinking. When I realized what they had done, and I started to analyze and try to imagine why they had done it, I think there's a better way. I think there's a better way to reduce the paralysis by analysis, but also to encourage creativity for DMs by giving them a list of what spell slots this monster has available, and then making suggestions for some of those spells, but allowing the DM to then fill out the rest of them. And furthermore, allowing the DM to decide how they want to use this monster. So let me present to you my way that I would change not any of the other stats, but specifically the way spellcasting is done for this particular monster. All right. So, my opinion, this is a better way. So, first of all, as a DM, I would take the innate spellcasting for those monsters that have it because of their race, like the Drow. All Drow get the Drow magic. So I would leave that innate spellcasting just like it was when the monster was first presented. And then when it comes to the class spellcasting, I would say the Drow Matron Mother is a 20th level spellcaster. Spellcasting ability is Wisdom, DC spell save 19, plus 11 to hit with spell attacks. She has the following available cleric spell slots. And then say 5 cantrips, 4 first level, 3 second level, 3 third level, 3 fourth level, 3 fifth level, 2 sixth level, 2 seventh level, 1 eighth level, 1 ninth level. Below are some suggested spells by role, depending on how you plan to use the Drow Matron Mother in an encounter. So then give 3 options. Give 2 or 3 options for every monster. And in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, what would be the 3 kinds of Drow Matron Mothers you might find? Well, you might find the Drow Matron Mother Commander. She commands the troops of her house like a ruthless general. Their honor is to die for her command and for Lost Crusade. So then what you might suggest to the DM, hey, one of your cantrips should probably be Thaumaturgy. One of your 3rd level spells should be Clairvoyance, because a general is supposed to see beyond what's there, and that helps in the planning and helps in deploying the troops and setting up the encounter. You could also kind of let, if you have a bunch of smart players that figure out the way sophisticated groups of enemies work, they probably are going to realize that somebody is setting a plan in place, and this Drow Matron Mother is probably the one that's doing that. 4th level, divination. Once again, trying to figure out what's going on before it happens, and freedom of movement. Throw that in there, because if you have like one of your champions and everything, and they get nailed by a spell, and they're incapacitated, just go over there and hit them with freedom of movement, get them out of there. Level 7, divine word. Level 9, gate. Why? I might need another ally coming in. All right, so that's one option for a Drow Matron Mother Commander. Now, let's take a look at a Drow Matron Mother support role. So she bolsters the martial and magical casters of her house in battle. Every Drow is a precious resource for Lost Crusade. So cantrips, you might suggest that DMs would add guidance and resistance. 1st level, bless and protection from evil and good. 3rd level, motivational speech, protection from energy. 5th level, mass cure wounds. 6th level, hero's feast, to prepare your troops for battle. 9th level, mass heal. So that would be a way of presenting this Drow as someone who is, yes, the head of her house, but she really cares. She really cares about the people in her command. And she's the kind of general that is going to let them know how valuable they are by not letting them die senselessly in battle. Okay. And then the 3rd kind of Drow Matron Mother that I could imagine, and again, this is all limited by my imagination, is a Drow Matron Mother Striker. So she leads from the front by hurling her magical and weapon attacks at the strongest foes of her house. She embodies Lost Crusade and inspires her followers with her example. All right, cantrips you might want to think about for this particular Drow Matron Mother would be Sacred Flame and Toll the Dead. 1st level, Inflict Wounds. 5th level, Flame Strike and Insect Plague. 6th level, Harm. 7th level, Firestorm. So, again, you can split the difference. You can show the DM all of the spell slots they have to play with if they want to go and fill out a full load of spells and really think about what they're going to use, what their opening move is going to be, what things they want the Drow Matron Mother to have access to during the combat. But then you can give them kind of a limited set of suggestions and say, hey, if you want to use it in this way, here's some ideas. And now, admittedly, I spent about 5 minutes on each of these spell lists. So you look at all the cleric spells available and you think about, well, what would a drow in my game do? What would a drow in your game do? What would a drow kind of in a typical Forgotten Realms game do? You might make some different choices. But again, it's D&D. Do what you want. So this is just, I think I would have been much happier with them reimagining the way that spellcasting monsters work if they had done something like this. If they had said, if they had preserved that idea of making more flexible options for the DM. Because it feels like, with the way they've reimagined the monsters, it feels like they've taken these monsters and handed them to the DM along with a straitjacket and say, nope, this is the only things that you have. Now, obviously, I know in the DM's guide it says, your table, your rules. You can do whatever you want. And that's what I always try to tell people when I'm doing one of my one mic streams, whether it's a Monster Monday, whether it's a Lore Friday. I throw out some of my ideas, but I always say, in your game, you may agree with this idea, you may not agree with this idea. So do what you want, because your game, your table, your rules, Mr. DM, Ms. DM. All right. So that's kind of the way I would look at it. So, if you guys are watching on the Twitch, I'd be interested in seeing comments on the Twitch stream. Do you like this kind of way of reimagining monsters and variations of each monster, or do you think that there's maybe yet a different way? And if you're not watching on Twitch, if you're watching the archive over on YouTube, well, thank you very much. Please subscribe to the channel, like the video, share the video, click the post notification bell, and leave a comment to let me know. And if you're on the Twitch, please subscribe to the channel, follow the channel, whatever. We would love to have you join our little community here. Let's see. All right. Yeah, that's pretty much. Oh, no, that doesn't quite do it. There's one more thing I need to do. One more reason I need to go back to the web page, and that is I need to reveal what we are going to look at for Monster Monday. Okay. On Monster Monday, we're going to look at a brand new monster that is introduced to 5th edition. And I'll have to look and see. I'm pretty sure it's probably been in older editions, but I haven't even started to do my full research for Monster Monday yet. I'll do that. I'll do the primary research for it tomorrow. The monster we're going to look at is one that has several variants in this book, and that's called the Sorrowsworn. And I chose that for 2 reasons. One is that it's a brand new monster, and I wanted to do a monster that's new to 5e out of the source book. The other reason is that this monster's native plane is the Shadowfell. And in Monster Monday, I just haven't done a lot of creatures that are native to the Shadowfell. So it would be really cool to take a look at the various different kinds of Sorrowsworn, and there are several different varieties. There's 5 different varieties. There's the angry Sorrowsworn, the hungry Sorrowsworn, the lonely Sorrowsworn, the lost Sorrowsworn, and the wretched Sorrowsworn. So we will talk about those on Monday for Monster Monday. I hope you can join us then. Here on the same Twitch channel. Archives will be up on YouTube later after that. All right, so let me go back to the slides and let me take a look and see if there are any questions. All right, so if you guys have any questions, please go ahead and throw them in the chat. Otherwise, and I am going to go ahead and to kind of wrap up, talk a little bit about coming events, and we will then go ahead and get you guys out of here. All right. I have been DM Galabond. Thank you so much for joining. Once again, follow or subscribe if you're on Twitch. Subscribe to the channel if you're on YouTube. And I have 4 streams that I do every week. Sundays, I do Walker of Waterdeep, which is a 5th edition campaign. They are currently in it's a campaign where we cross the streams between D&D 5e and Magic the Gathering. They are currently in a plane that all the monsters are, or primarily most of the monsters are pulled from the Arabian Nights expansion of Magic the Gathering. And the mechanics of the monsters are inspired by the 2nd edition D&D setting of Dark Sun. So a lot desert world, a lot of psionic monsters, and a lot of monsters that have some crazy psionic abilities. So that's been a lot of fun, and we're doing that as a big dungeon crawl. They're going into a big ziggurat. They're on level 2 of 3 of the ziggurat. They're trying to fight their way towards the evil King Suleiman, who is trying to uh, bring about his own sort of apotheosis, and using a pretext of these elaborate day-long festivities, festival and games that go along with it to bring that about. Mondays, we do Monster Monday. That's 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And as I've just said, we're going to be looking at the Sorrowsworn this coming Monday. On Wednesday nights, we do Sword Coast Chronicles. Now, I should say coming up this coming Sunday, no game. This coming Wednesday, no game. Both for the same reason. I have season tickets to my local pro soccer teams, and one of the teams is playing a home match on Sunday. One of the teams is playing a home match on Wednesday night. So D&D doesn't happen because I already paid for the season tickets, and by golly, I'm going to use those seats. Saturday night this week, so tomorrow night, we will have a Saturday Night Greyhawk. That is our 2nd edition game, where we are going through the original Temple of Elemental Evil. All right, now all the streams are live on Twitch. All the archives are over on YouTube. We do have a Patreon, so if you want to help us out, you can go check out the Patreon and throw a little bit of change our way. It also, of course, helps if you follow the channel or subscribe to the channel on YouTube and on Twitch. All right. I don't see any other questions. So, with that, I am going to bring the music back up a little bit. And, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much for joining me. Hope you have enjoyed this. Hope you have found this educational. Hope you've got some ideas out of this. Hope you found this a little bit entertaining. Like I said, leave comments over on the archives on YouTube, and let me know what you think. Let me know if you have any questions about other monsters that you would like to see profiled on Monster Monday. All right, everybody. Take care. We'll talk to you later. Good night.